Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping into a really fascinating slice of American history, roughly 1820 to 1840. It's often called the Age of Reform. And it's a time when Americans were seriously grappling with what freedom even meant. There's this huge push to try and reshape society really from the inside out. To kick things off, there's a story about Abby Kelly. She was a teacher up in Lynn, Massachusetts. In 1838, she goes down to Philadelphia for an abolitionist meeting. It turns into, well, what she called her baptism of fire. An absolutely furious mob, stirred up by racist talk, actually storms the hall and burns it right down. But Abby Kelly, she didn't quit, not at all. For the next 20 years, she was out there lecturing, challenging that whole cult of domesticity idea, that a woman's place was only in the home. Another activist, Lucy Stone, later said Abby Kelly basically earned for us all the right of free speech. Quite something. And that story, it just perfectly sets the stage, doesn't it? It shows how interconnected all these different reform movements were. Our mission today is to really unpack that using the sources to see how these reforms popped up, how they clashed, and how they ended up changing America.
It really does. And what's so striking, as that story shows, is that these weren't separate little campaigns. They were all tangled together. People were questioning everything: property, gender roles, race, government itself. We really want to explore the why behind this explosion of activism. Why then?
Right, this quest for a better society, it feels like the air was thick with it. Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote in 1841 something like, "The doctrine of reform has never had such hope as at the present hour." And look at the range, trying to ban liquor, stop stuff happening on Sundays, fix prisons, get kids into schools, help out laborers, even start whole new cooperative societies. It was everywhere.
And the methods were just as varied. You had some folks pushing moral suasion, basically, trying to convince people, change their hearts. Others were like, no, we need the government involved, especially with things like alcohol, demon rum, as they called it. And then you had the ones who just checked out of mainstream society altogether. They started these communities trying to build, heavens on earth. A lot of this energy, it really ties back to the Second Great Awakening, that big religious revival. It fostered this idea of perfectionism.
Perfectionism, meaning?
Meaning the belief that both people and society could just keep getting better and better indefinitely. That improvement was possible, maybe even inevitable. And this wasn't just an American thing either. Reformers were crossing the Atlantic constantly, sharing ideas. But within the U.S., it definitely played out differently region by region.
How so?
Well, temperance, the anti-alcohol movement, was pretty big everywhere. But things like women's rights, labor reform, even widespread education, those really struggled or just didn't exist in the South.
Because of slavery.
Exactly. They got linked with the anti-slavery movement, and that was just toxic territory down there.
Okay, let's talk about those heavens on earth for a sec. The Utopian communities. The name comes from Thomas More's Utopia, right?
And their main goal was to push back against what they saw as too much individualism, that sort of dog-eat-dog competition emerging. They wanted cooperation, bridging the gap between rich and poor.
And this is when words like socialism and communism start popping up in political talk.
Yeah, referring to this idea of shared ownership, communal living. And they often experimented with different ideas about marriage and gender roles, too.
So who are some of the big ones? The Shakers, right? They were pretty successful.
Oh, definitely the most successful religious one. At their height, maybe 5,000 members. Communities from Maine down to Kentucky. They believed God was both male and female, which led to this idea of spiritual equality between the sexes. Very radical for the time. They practiced celibacy, virgin purity, lived communally, men and women separately, but equal leaders, and economically, surprisingly successful.
Oh, selling furniture.
That too. Their furniture is iconic. But also garden seeds, herbal medicines, breeding cattle. They were quite industrious despite rejecting private property.
Then there's Oneida. That one sounds different.
John Humphrey Noyes.
Yes, founded in upstate New York, 1848. Oneida is really known for Noyes' idea of complex marriage.
Complex marriage, meaning...
Yeah. Well, basically, any man could ask any woman for sexual relations. She could say yes or no, but it was all recorded publicly.
Wow.
The idea was to get rid of exclusive affections, like jealousy or possessiveness, which Noyes thought damaged the community. It was, frankly, pretty dictatorial, but it lasted a long time, till 1881.
So you had religious ones like the Shakers and Oneida, but also secular ones like Robert Owen.
Right. Owen was this British factory owner, kind of a wealthy industrialist turned reformer. He had this model village in Scotland, New Lanark, with good housing, education. Then in 1825, he buys land in Indiana and starts New Harmony. His vision was for a new moral world.
What did that involve? He had strong ideas about education, taking kids early for community schooling, Big advocate for women's rights, too. Wanted women to have education and divorce rights, not be, quote, enslaved to their husbands.
Did New Harmony work out?
Not really. It fell apart pretty quickly, only lasted a few years.
Hmm.
But Owen's ideas, they were really influential later on, especially for the labor movement, education reformers, and women's rights advocates.
It's amazing to think about. If you could actually see a map from back then, you'd spot these communities dotted all over, especially New England and the Midwest, Shaker villages, Owenite towns, Fourierist phalanxes, stretching from Maine clear down to Kentucky. It just shows how widespread this urge was to build a better society, right?
Absolutely. And you might see an engraving, maybe like that one by Benson Lossing of a Shaker dance.
Oh, yeah. What's that like?
Well, you see rows of men and women, kept physically separate, but they're moving together, worshiping. It's a unique, really captures the spirit of these different experiments.
Okay, so moving beyond the sort of experimental utopias, what about the more mainstream reforms? Temperance seems like a huge one.
Oh, massive. And it really shifted gears. It started as pushing for moderation, just drink less, but then it became about total elimination prohibition.
And organizations like the American Temperance Society, founded 1826, they were effective.
Incredibly, they got hundreds of thousands of people to pledge off alcohol. And get this, by 1840, the amount Americans were drinking per person was apparently less than half what it had been just 10 years earlier.
Wow. But not everyone was thrilled about that, I imagine.
Definitely not. Think about urban working men. For them, the tavern wasn't just a place to drink. It was like a community center, a place to talk politics, relax. Temperance felt like an attack on their social life, their freedom.
And Catholics too, right? They had a different view.
Yeah, American Catholics, their numbers growing with immigration, tended to see sin differently. More something inherent, maybe unavoidable. This whole perfectionist idea that you could just eliminate sin felt almost arrogant to them. They focused more on freedom within the community, family, church, rather than this intense individual self-control the Protestant reformers were pushing.
That's such an interesting conflict, this idea of liberation versus control. The reformers wanted to free people.
Right, free them from slavery to alcohol or poverty or sin as they saw it.
But the path to that freedom was through more control, self-discipline.
Precisely.
Yeah.
True freedom, in their view, wasn't doing whatever you want. It was internalizing discipline, controlling your passions. It kind of echoes the old Puritan idea of Christian liberty versus natural liberty.
Natural liberty being.
Just chaos, vice, doing whatever impulses tell you. They saw self-control as the foundation of a virtuous republic. You see groups like the American Tract Society just churning out millions of religious pamphlets trying to instill this disciplined morality.
And this links to building institutions too, right? Jails, poorhouses, asylums.
Exactly. The 1830s and 40s saw a huge boom in building these places. And it's easy to look back cynically now, but the initial idea was genuinely optimistic.
Optimistic how?
The goal was rehabilitation. They thought these controlled environments could reshape people, criminals, the poor, the mentally ill, into productive, self-disciplined citizens.
Like Dorothea Dix, she was focused on the mentally ill, wasn't she?
Yes, a key figure. A Massachusetts schoolteacher, horrified by finding mentally ill people just locked up in jails. She campaigned tirelessly for humane treatment, leading directly to the creation of dozens of specialized mental hospitals.
But the biggest institution-building effort before the Civil War, that was schools, right? Common schools.
Absolutely. The movement for tax-supported state school systems open to everyone. Horace Mann in Massachusetts was the big champion here.
And his goal was?
He believed public education could be the great equalizer. Bring kids from all backgrounds together, give the less fortunate a path upward, restore social harmony, and it had a huge impact, especially in the North. By 1860, pretty much every northern state had a public school system.
And this created jobs for women.
A massive opportunity. Teaching became one of the first real careers open to large numbers of women. They quickly became the majority of teachers.
But not in the South.
Much, much slower progress there. Part of it was planters not wanting to pay taxes for poor white kids' education, but also a deep fear of educating black people, enslaved or free. Literacy was seen as dangerous.
So this education gap just widened the divide between North and South even more.
Just one more way they were heading in different directions with very different ideas about society and who belonged.
Which brings us inevitably to slavery. Before the 1830s, what was the main idea for ending it, among white people anyway?
The dominant idea was colonization. Basically, the plan was to free slaves and then deport them, send them to Africa or maybe the Caribbean.
And the American Colonization Society was set up for this.
Yes, in 1816, they even established Liberia in West Africa. Figures like Henry Clay, President Monroe, lots of prominent people supported it. They just couldn't imagine blacks and whites living together as equals in America. Yeah. But, and this is so important, most African Americans absolutely rejected colonization. They were like, no, we are Americans. This is our country.
They saw themselves as American citizens.
Exactly. There was a big convention of free blacks in Philadelphia back in 1817, demanding rights here in America. They weren't going anywhere.
Okay, so colonization is simmering, but then things really heat up in the 1830s. Militant abolitionism arrives. This feels like a real turning point.
Oh, it's a huge shift.
Yeah.
We're talking about rejecting gradual emancipation entirely. The call now was for immediate abolition.
Immediate. And no compromise.
No compromise. They used incredibly strong, explosive language against slaveholders and the institution itself. And crucially, they insisted that freed slaves must become equal citizens. Right here, no deportation.
So rooting out racism, too, not just slavery.
That was the goal, a fundamental transformation.
Who were the key figures driving this? David Walker.
Yeah, David Walker, a free black man in Boston. His appeal to the colored citizens of the world in 1829, it was powerful. Called for black unity, resistance, warned whites about divine judgment, really radical stuff. And William Lloyd Garrison starts the Liberator newspaper in 1831. He famously declared, "I will not equivocate, I will not excuse, I will not retreat a single inch, and I will be heard." Just absolute refusal to compromise. His pamphlet attacking colonization was also super influential.
And these weren't lone voices crying in the wilderness. They knew how to spread the word. They used new steam-powered printing presses, took advantage of rising literacy.
The impact of those common schools again.
Right. They flooded the North with pamphlets, newspapers, petitions. They formed the American Anti-Slavery Society in 1833, and it grew fast, maybe 100,000 members within a few years.
And they had speakers, too, like Theodore Weld. Weld was amazing. He trained a whole cadre of speakers who went out, often using the passionate, emotional style of religious revivals to hammer home the message. Slavery is a sin. You are complicit if you don't fight it. Now, despite the fiery language, most abolitionists rejected actual violence. Their main weapon was moral suasion.
Try and prick the conscience of the nation.
Exactly. Convince slaveholders of their sin, convince Northerners of their complicity. Their core argument was that the right to personal liberty for everyone, regardless of race, trumped any right to property in human beings.
Which was revolutionary.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They were redefining who counted as the American people, not bound by race. That idea would echo powerfully later in things like the 14th Amendment. And they were smart. They wrapped themselves in the flag, so to speak, used the Declaration of Independence, even renamed the old bell in Philadelphia the Liberty Bell, linking their fight to the nation's founding ideals.
And black abolitionists themselves were absolutely central, weren't they? Frederick Douglass, a giant. Escaped slavery, became this incredibly powerful orator and writer. His autobiography just blew people away, showing the brutal reality of slavery firsthand. And Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. Published in 1852, it became maybe the single most effective piece of anti-slavery literature ever. Sold over 1 million copies. It humanized enslaved people in a way nothing else had. She drew inspiration partly from Josiah Henson's life story. And they weren't just writing, they were actively challenging the country's hypocrisy.
Right. Many black abolitionists stopped celebrating the 4th of July. Instead, they held freedom celebrations on dates like January 1st or August 1st, marking emancipation elsewhere. And Douglass's famous speech, "What to the Slave is the 4th of July," delivered in 1852, just devastating.
He calls out the gross injustice and cruelty at the heart of the nation, the hypocrisy of celebrating liberty while holding people in bondage. But he also claims the founders' principles, arguing the Declaration's ideals needed to be freed from racial limits. And you had black newspapers starting up, too, like Freedom's Journal.
Samuel Cornish helped start that one, the very first black newspaper, back in 1827, making sure black perspectives were part of the conversation. But, make no mistake, this movement faced brutal opposition, not just in the South, but in the North, too.
From who?
Often from gentlemen of property and standing, merchants, bankers, lawyers, with business ties to the South. They feared abolition would break up the Union, hurt the economy, and frankly, challenge white supremacy.
So, Ellens.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mobs frequently attacked abolitionist meetings, destroyed printing presses. Elijah Lovejoy, an editor in Illinois, was actually murdered in 1837 trying to defend his press.
And that hall in Philadelphia?
Pennsylvania Hall, yeah. Burned to the ground by a mob in 1838, just days after it opened for abolitionist gatherings. And the government pushed back, too. Congress passed the gag rule in 1836.
What did that do?
It basically tabled all petitions about abolishing slavery without even discussing them. Just shut down the debate. Former President John Quincy Adams, serving in Congress, fought it relentlessly and finally got it repealed in 1844.
So here's the twist, though, right? All this hostility, these attacks, they kind of backfired.
In a huge way. Because suddenly, Northerners who might not have cared that much about slavery itself started seeing it as a threat to their own liberties.
Freedom of speech, freedom of the press.
Exactly. If abolitionists could be silenced, maybe anyone could. It broadened the appeal of the anti-slavery cause significantly. It wasn't just about black rights anymore. It was about protecting basic American freedoms for everyone.
And this period is also where we see the roots of American feminism really take hold. Women were heavily involved in abolitionism, weren't they? Massively. Especially women from evangelical Protestant backgrounds, also Quakers. They were the foot soldiers, circulating petitions, organizing meetings, raising money. They became, public women. They were active in other reforms, too. Oh, yeah. Temperance, building asylums, think Dorothea Dix again. This activism gave them organizational skills and a public voice.
And critically, fighting for the rights of enslaved people made many women intensely aware of their own lack of rights, their own subordinate position in society.
Like the Grimke sisters, Angelina and Sarah.
Perfect example. They were from a South Carolina slaveholding family, rejected slavery, and started speaking out against it up north. When some clergymen criticized them for speaking in public, acting unwomanly, they didn't back down. They defended women's right to participate in public debate.
And Sarah Grimke wrote letters on the equality of the sexes.
Yes. In 1838, a powerful critique of the whole separate spheres idea. She argued for equal rights, educational opportunities, even raised the issue of equal pay for equal work. Way ahead of her time.
This leads pretty directly to Seneca Falls, doesn't it? 1848. It does. The Seneca Falls Convention, organized by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott, both were abolitionist veterans. They had actually been excluded from participating in a World Anti-Slavery Convention in London just because they were women.
Imagine that.
So at Seneca Falls, they drafted the Declaration of Sentiments. It was modeled right on the Declaration of Independence.
But with a key addition.
Right. They added "and women" to Jefferson's famous line about all men being created equal. And then they listed all the ways men had oppressed women, with the denial of the right to vote being central.
That convention really is seen as the launch of the organized movement for women's suffrage in America, the start of a very long fight.
Beyond voting, there were other feminist thinkers emerging too, like Margaret Fuller.
Fuller was part of that transcendentalist circle with Emerson. In her book, Woman in the 19th Century, from 1845, she applied the transcendentalist idea of personal growth and self-fulfillment directly to women. She argued that women needed freedom to develop their full potential, intellectually and personally, that every path should be open to them, just as for men.
And the movement wasn't monolithic. You had figures like Sojourner Truth bringing a different perspective. Yes, the famous black abolitionist and former slave. At a women's rights convention in 1851, she reportedly gave that powerful speech challenging the focus on middle-class white women, asking, "And aren't I a woman?"
Highlighting the strength and labor of working-class women, black and white.
And then there's the whole issue of dress reform. Amelia Bloomer.
Right, the bloomer costume, basically trousers under a shorter skirt or tunic. It sounds minor now, but it was a serious challenge to the incredibly restrictive clothing women wore then.
Those corsets and layers of petticoats literally made it hard for women to move freely, to participate in public life. Of course, the bloomers got viciously mocked in cartoons and stuff. Women riding bicycles in bloomers, totally scandalous.
Exactly. But behind the mockery was a serious point about physical freedom. Feminists also used the Toten analogy of the slavery of sex.
Comparing women's situation, especially within marriage, to slavery.
Yes, critiquing the legal doctrines, where women had no right to their own property, their own wages, even their own bodies, under the authority of their husbands.
This pushed for legal changes, like Married Women's Property Acts.
It did. Starting with Mississippi in 1839, states began passing laws allowing married women to own property in their own name. Initially, it was often about protecting family assets from a husband's debts, but it evolved. New York's 1860 law was more comprehensive, letting married women sign contracts, control their wages. It was a big step towards economic independence and this core idea of self-ownership for women.
But this push for women's equality, even their right to speak publicly, caused friction even within the reform movements, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
It led directly to a major split in the abolitionist movement in 1840.
Over Abby Kelly again.
Basically, yes. Her election to a leadership committee in the American Anti-Slavery Society was the breaking point for some men. They walked out and formed a rival group, the American and Foreign Anti-Slavery Society.
Because they couldn't accept a woman in that role.
Pretty much. And that split also contributed to the formation of the Liberty Party, the first political party focused solely on abolition, nominating James G. Birney for president. So the fight for women's rights was deeply intertwined with, and sometimes clashed with, the fight against slavery.
What an incredibly dynamic and often turbulent period. We've covered so much ground, this explosion of perfectionism fueling everything from utopian communities like the Shakers to temperance to the push for common schools and humane asylums. But the twin engines that seem most powerful looking back are the crusades against slavery and for women's rights. Figures like Garrison, Douglas, Stowe, Walker, just shattering the complacency around slavery.
Demanding not just an end to bondage, but full colorblind citizenship.
And then women like the Grimke's, Stanton, Mott, Sojourner Truth, Fuller inspired by abolition, stepping out, demanding their own rights, culminating in Seneca Falls. It really reshaped the landscape of freedom.
It really did. And if you zoom out, you see all these reformers with all their different goals wrestling with that fundamental American question. What's the right balance between individual liberty and the needs of a good, just society? Their struggles during this age of reform are a powerful reminder that freedom isn't some fixed thing. It's always contested, always being redefined by people willing to challenge the way things are. Kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? What deeply embedded unfreedoms exist today that future generations might look back on and ask, how could they not see that?